And what is going on, guys? My name is Curry Tech and welcome back to another video on the channel. And today's video we'll be going over a AMD RX 6700 XT versus an RTX 3070. By the way, this video is going to be using a bunch of websites, which I'll put links down in the description if you want to take a look at it for yourselves. But since I don't have these cards, I'll be using other people's benchmarks who have done benchmarks on 1080p, 1440p, and 4K gaming. Anyway, let's get over to it and let's talk about the differences. So with the RX 6700 XT, it's based off of AMD's Navi 22 GPU. It is RDNA 2, not RDNA 1, based off of TSMC 7nm process, which is basically the most basic node that is out right now and the most efficient one, unless you count Intel using a 14nm one. And the RTX 3080 is using Samsung's 8nm node. For the boost clocks, it's quite different with these two cards. The RX 6700 XT hits a 2.5 gigahertz or 2581 megahertz, versus the RTX 3070 not hitting that high boost clock as the Radeon card, reaching about 1.7 gigahertz. The memory capacity is, and the RX 6700 XT actually has 12 gigabytes of GDDR6 memory versus the RTX 3070 only having 8 gigabytes of GDDR6 memory. Both have two different buses, actually bits. The RX 6700 XT memory bus is actually 192, which is actually a lot smaller than the 384-bit bus we see on the higher end RTX 30 series cards. But the 3070 has a 256 memory bit bus, so that might compensate for a higher bandwidth capacity, so more space for the memory, or should I say pathway. And both have a really close TGP, and both are priced really close together. The RX 6700 XT being around $479 versus the RTX 3070 being $500 or $499, 99 cents, whatever you want to call it. Now, going over specs and whatever, the RTX 3070 is based on the GOA 104 GPU, Ampere architecture, obviously, and this is all the specs that you really need to know. What it factors in is performance, and let's see some performance numbers coming from Tom's Hardware. Thank you, Tom's Hardware, for this, because I don't have these cards, so I'm gonna just show you guys these. So we have a bunch of games we have here. So out of a 13 game average, the blue is the RTX 3070 and the red is the RX 6700 XT. Now, as you can see, the 13 game average is around 130 FPS, give or take, the Radeon cards being 1 FPS behind. Now, as we see in Assassin's Creed Valhalla, the RX 6700 XT already takes a big performance leap of 20 FPS, but games will depend on which APU and engine is being used. Some favor NVIDIA, whereas other games favor the Radeon cards. Now with Borderlands 3, you can see the RX 6700 XT actually pulling ahead again of the RTX 3070 by at least 16, I can't do math, but around 10 plus FPS, which is, when we go to Division 2, it actually switches, going to around 143 FPS for the RTX 3070 versus the RX 6700 XT. Now, this may be because Division 2 uses a certain engine that NVIDIA cards are better at, or it's just the RTX 3070 may perform better in that scenario. In Dirt 5, we can see they're very close together, so that's just a neutral ground. In Far Cry 5, which is a fun game to play, the RTX 3070 takes a drastic leap over the RX 6700 XT. This is at 1080p ultra graphics on everything, no ray tracing or DLSS or AMD Fidelity FX turned on. That's AMD's own equivalent to DLSS. Now going on, Red Dead Redemption, both are super close, 3 FPS difference. And shout out to Tomb Raider, we get around the same FPS difference of 2, the RTX 3070 taking the lead. These games are very, very graphically intensive and also visually intensive as well. So this is at 1080p. We'll move on to 1440p and 4K. So this is from TechSpot, and as we can see, we see very popular games at the moment, such as Apex, Warzone, Fortnite. People still play that. But here's Apex Legends. At high quality, this is a 1080p, 1440p, and 4K bar graph. As you can see, the light blue is the RX 6700 XT. Sorry, it labels it 37 to 6700 XT. Stupid. But we can see the 6700 XT actually going way behind in Apex by 30 frames at 1080p at high quality. This may be because of the lower core count, as NVIDIA has that over the RTX 3070, whereas the RTX 3070 has around, I think, 6,000 CUDA cores if I'm correct, and the 6700 XT only has around 3,000 something. And that might play a factor into this. And also IPC is a great indicator of performance as well, instructions per clock cycle. It may not matter that the Radeon card has 12 gigabytes of RAM versus the 8 gigabytes of RAM. That only matters when there's really a lot of textures and high quality textures being used. So the 3070 may limit the ultra quality settings you may put, but it will still be more than enough for 1080p. And the RTX 3070 absolutely flattening the 6700 XT at 197 FPS, basically reaching almost 200 FPS, and the lowest it was dipping down to is 175. As we go to 1440p, things are still the same. The 3070 taking the lead as holding the lead on, getting 135 FPS versus the 6700 XT getting around 113 FPS. As we move down to 4K, it's even lower with FPS because of the higher quality count. So the 6700 XT actually getting 74 FPS and the 3070 getting 89 FPS, which shows that in Apex, the 3070 is a card that you may want if you main that game, and it may be a card that you want. So it would be great for 1080p gaming, 1440p gaming, and it's also great for 4K, trying to get into 4K. Above 60 FPS, it's kind of where you want to be at high quality settings. Move down to Warzone, which is another very fun game I always like to play. The 6700 XT, 174 FPS versus the RTX 3070 only getting 179 FPS, which, if we go back to the Apex Legends, is not showing a very big difference in performance. The 6700 XT is actually keeping up with the 3070 very well, for having less CUDA cores, and also the memory bit bus actually being a lot smaller. Although the AMD does have smart access memory, if you have a CPU that supports it, it may enable a little bit more performance, but it just shows that performance does vary from game to game depending on the API, the engine, the graphics, like the textures and things like that. It all depends. Sometimes cards are favorable over the other, whereas other games it might not matter. As in Warzone, you can see that it's barely 5 FPS difference at 1080p. At 1440p, we can see around 9 FPS difference, which is actually the biggest FPS difference we see throughout Warzone. This is also at ultra quality, by the way. As we move down to 4K, we can see that the 6700 XT is getting 60 FPS and the 3070 is getting 67 FPS. So, compared to Apex, it actually has a lot lower performance in 4K, as Warzone is a very big map, and you also have a lot of players like jumping in, a lot of textures to load in, as you know, Verdansk and I forgot the other map, but the smaller map takes a lot of textures, and using these textures and mapping these textures out for you to see takes a lot at 4K. Getting that high quality but also 4K is very hard, but it shows that these cards are very great cards for what they do. Now, this is Fortnite using the DX12, which is the new API that supports ray tracing and DLSS. Sorry, I can't speak. And we can see a very big performance difference actually, as the 3070 is actually getting around 25 plus more FPS. I can't do math again, but it's a very big performance difference, as the 6700 XT is getting 155, the 3070 is getting 181 at 1080p at epic quality, highest you can go. Now, the difference may be because of the DX12 being maybe more lenient towards the RTX 3070, or it could be because of the IPC of the 8nm node from Samsung. But it seems that Fortnite does take a liking to the NVIDIA card, and the RX 6700 XT actually performs a lot less than the 3070. Now at 1440p, which is the sweet spot for most gamers and your introduction to a lot higher resolution to 1080p, This is 1440p. The 6700 XT is 102 FPS and 37 is getting 123 FPS. So a 21 FPS difference. And also at 4K, we could see the 6700 XT getting 51 FPS and the 3070 getting above 60 FPS at 4K epic quality. I'm not saying that the 6700 XT is not the card you should get or anything, but in certain games it does seem that the 3070 trumps the RX 6700 XT a lot more. But also in a lot of games the cards are still neck and neck. It's just like a few instances where the cards might be super different, so it just depends on what it is. And another one, Microsoft Flight Simulator, which is always going to be a very hard hit to the card anyway. You can see the 3070 barely etching out at 1080p and actually getting ahead of the 6700 XT at 1440p. That could be because of the extra CUDA cores that it has, almost like I think double of the 6700 XT. So that might also be why the difference is so big at 1440p, or it could just be because of memory, or there's a lot of factors that play into why there's a big gap. But when we go to 4K, we can see the gap also shrink again. So that may vary depending on your own hardware as well. And as we go down to, let's see, let's do Doom Eternal, which is known for having a lot of FPS and great quality as well. Ultra Nightmare settings, by the way. The 6700 XT actually beats the 3070 at 1080p by 2 FPS. Very interesting. But when we go to 1440p, the 3070 gets an average of 244 over 242 for the RX 6700 XT. Now, Doom Eternal, I think, does take a liking towards the Radeon GPU, just slightly, depending on the engine, but they're so close together that really I couldn't say anyone won it in Doom Eternal. And this is with everything ray tracing and DLSS off. But very, very great cards for the pricing. Anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed the video. It was just a very brief talk through of the FPS differences and just games that are very popular right now. I don't have my own card, so thank you for TechSpot and Tom's Hardware for providing these graphs of all the cards that were tested. Anyway, if you guys are deciding for an RX 6700 XT or 3070, the 6700 XT is actually available on Amazon, although it is priced at $1,000, whereas it should be for $79 or $500 depending on the third-party AIBs. But if you are super wanting a graphics card right now, the 6700 XT is more than capable of doing what you need for games and stuff. You may not be getting let's say you might be losing 10 FPS to the RTX 3070 in certain games, or you might be beating it by 5 FPS in certain games. But the difference in performance from that, and also if you just need a card, you should get the RX 6700 XT. If you don't need a card and you're just upgrading your pre-existing old card and your old card works definitely fine and really well, then you can wait. But anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Make sure you leave a like and comment down below. Anyway, peace out.